Hey everybody, what is going on? I am Maximus Rex and this is Big Baby Reviews. Today is Keith Giffen Day, so we're looking at the next issue of his run on the Defenders in the late 70s. More specifically, this is issue number 50, cover dated August 1977. Not much to say about the cover because we're covering Keith Giffen and not this cover artist. It is Al Milgrom. Not doing a bad job here. Pretty cool cover. Pretty typical cover of Marvel Comics in the 70s. Definitely riffing a little bit still on the Jack Kirby look and composition. I've talked about before how, Stan Lee encouraged his artist once Jack Kirby left Marvel in the early 70s to basically kind of draw like Jack, basically was what they were told to do. So a lot of the artists owe a lot of their stylistic ticks to what Kirby was doing beforehand at Marvel, and probably at some of the stuff he was doing at DC as well. And in around this time, Kirby was actually back at Marvel, mostly doing covers, I think. So again, pretty Marvel 70s house style cover. Not going to talk too much about that because we're here to look at some Keith Giffen. Let's crack her open, have a look inside. So credits, we got David Kraft words, Keith Giffen artist, John Costanza, letters, and Don Warfield doing colors. So Keith Giffen is credited as the artist, but there is a special thanks section at the end that I'm just going to go to real quick just so I don't miss any names. Basically what we have are artists helping him out on the inks, I believe. So you got Mike Royer, John Tartaglione, and Dave Cockrum are credited as art assists, so I'm going to assume that's inking. So I think some of the stuff that looks more Kirby-ish is probably inked by Keith Giffen and also Mark Royer, and the stuff that looks less typically Kirby, at least in the aesthetic, are probably inked by the other two guys. Starting off the great splash of the Hulk here, looks great, very Kirby-esque, of course, got the squiggly lines all over the place, the Kirby teeth. As I've talked about before, as far as Kirby clones go, I think Giffen does a really good job of working in the Kirby stuff, but also working in a bit of his own stuff as well. Foreshortened arms here, definitely in the Kirby mold with those straight out kind of angular lines. What Neil Adams referred to in this classic interview, if you're into comics, you might have seen it, where he's talking about Jack Kirby in the Jack Kirby documentary about sinew, right? Like how he just kind of draws that straight line to represent kind of a taut muscle. So Keith Giffen definitely picking up on that and on the Kirby crackle. And what we've got here is Scorpio, who is Nick Fury's brother or half-brother, I'm not quite sure, going up against the Defenders and presenting his army of robots that are based on the zodiac signs, right? So the newborn members of my own zodiac. And again, this is a pretty kind of Kirby way of presenting new characters. What's interesting here though in the design, looks very Kirby, kind of, the composition in each panel and some of the character designs and stuff definitely have some Kirby inspiration. But what I like is, where Kirby would throw sometimes what I call like a squiggle shadow but below her characters, like a cast shadow that is abstractly shaped, doesn't necessarily represent the shape of the character, but works kind of design wise. Here he actually has, instead of the shadow, kind of worked in the actual signs of each zodiac character, right? So you've got the Leo, you've got Sagittarius here, Aquarius, etc., etc. Some of them, again, very Kirby inspired to me. Aquarius, when I looked at it, I'm like, hey, that's Paste Pot Pete, right? But down here, there's something where there's some Kirby elements to this design, but also some kind of, I don't know, more monstrous kind of elements to it that I really like the design of this guy, who is Ares. And then you've got Cancer here, who is basically just like a Kirby robot, right? And these characters are all robots. It's, pretty much revealed right from the beginning. So most of this issue is basically just a slugfest between the Hulk and the Defenders, of course, and these Zodiac characters. I'm going to mention once again, I love Giffen's designs for backgrounds. All throughout this Defenders run, he's, channeling the Kirby and the Steranko influence. It's pretty obvious. I'll state, I've probably stated again, but just the overall feeling I get from looking at these comics, these Defenders issues is, this whole storyline, he's probably decided to use, both of those inspirations, maybe like, character designs, I'm going to go with Kirby, but backgrounds and stuff, I'm going to go with Steranko, which Steranko, again, was just kind of riffing on Kirby and pushing that style forward in his own direction. So the example down here that we get, which is a mix, again, of Kirby and Steranko kind of design elements for the background. I love all this stuff. There's a squiggly shadow once again. Good use of shadow here over Nick Fury's face. Now, Nick Fury has life decoys, robots that replace him. So in this issue, I've been mentioning Nick Fury in past reviews and stuff, but he is actually just a life decoy, a robot decoy that represents Nick Fury, not the actual Nick Fury. But yeah, I was going to say, I just love the way the cast shadows are on this face here. and how mysterious it makes him look. Great panel there, out of context, you know, it's just a great design. Would look good on a t-shirt. I like this sequence here where Ares, you know, kind of charges into the Hulk, and I just thought it was kind of hilarious and cool too. The way the whole piece of the wall behind the Hulk kind of just blows out of the building here. I just thought that was a very cool, interesting panel. And another example here of the kind of Kirby-esque foreshortening that Giffen's using as the Hulk, you know, jumps back and into the building here. 70s ads, love those. Gonna remind everyone too about how much I love the colors. Not just in the actual comic book story, but all throughout the comic. Lots of reds and oranges and yellows. Pretty typical colors, I think, of the 70s, right? So we got a sequence with Nighthawk here. Once again, some very Kirby elements. Here's maybe a page where I feel it was inked by someone else other than Giffen or Royer. I couldn't really pinpoint it exactly, but there's something a bit softer in the inking and not quite as bold as compared to the other pages, right? Or at least like last issues that was fully inked by Royer, and that really gave off that 70s Kirby vibe. Got the Kirby, the big square Kirby fist here, and also this shot of Nighthawk. You know, he is a prisoner of this kind of, I don't know if it's exactly a chair, but some sort of contraption. Kind of reminds me of Metron from the New Gods, right? These little sequences here where a panel's kind of cut in half and you can see both floors, I always found kind of interesting. Always reminded me a little bit of video games, right? Like that early Nintendo video game, I think that was called Kung Fu. I'm not 100% sure if it was called that, but it was basically kind of a rip-off of the Bruce Lee movies. Always a side-scroller, right, where you would go up the stairs onto the next floor. Based on one of those classic Bruce Lee movies. I'm not quite sure which one it is. Forgive me. The titles change also from like Asia to America, so I'm a bit confused. Is it The Big Boss or something like that? I know he fights Kareem Abdul-Jabbar at some point, but yeah, that was a fun video game when I was a kid. If you guys out there who are watching are probably around my age, you know what I'm talking about. But yeah, like I said, mostly just a slugfest involving the Hulk, but hey, you know, I'm not going to complain. I think Giffen's version of the Hulk is pretty darn cool. This great product once again I talked about last review. Marvel licensing products sometimes like this I can kind of understand, but this thing here, shooters and statues, so some sort of weapon kind of gun projectile thing that I'm not exactly sure what this is that you shoot. Might as well read it. For all you action fans, we proudly present shooters and statues and a price guide thrown in for luck. So what I'm going to assume is that you've got these little statuettes that you fire at. Yeah, just lots of really weird licensed products from Marvel, especially I guess in the 70s and in the 80s as well. Instead of doing all that stuff themselves, they would license it out and you'd get some kind of crappy product featuring Marvel licensed characters, right? So an interesting sequence here where Scorpio finds out that Virgo, basically one of his creations in the Zodiac team, has been destroyed. And she's a lady, so I don't know if he had kind of feelings for her or something. But what I like is it leads to this somewhat, you know, again, you still feel a little bit of the amateur young artist in Giffen on a shot like this, but I do think it's still very cool and very evocative. I just like the expression of it. And then it leads to this panel, which I think is very kind of somber and dark and works really well. I really like it. Even though we've got the Kirby aesthetic here, I feel like that's maybe more of a Keith Giffen flourish. I don't know if Kirby ever did something similar to this in his comics. I feel like that's more of a Giffen choice in this panel here. Really good at the rubble. I don't know if McFarlane looked at some of these Giffen issues in inspiration how to draw rubble, but I think Keith Giffen does a really good job of it here. Lots of cool destruction and broken up pieces, very detailed panels. Definitely not skimping on the backgrounds, right? As you can see here, lots of Kirby and Steranko tech going on once again. And kudos to the colorist. I think the colors in these late 70s books are pretty darn good. I've talked about before how you can barely see the dot pattern apart from maybe some lighter colors like back here. Yeah, just pretty good contrast overall. Even though there's a lot going on, it's not too confusing visually. And boom, this is like one of the main reasons I started doing the reviews with these Defenders books in the Giffen books. How amazing is this double page splash? I love it. It's, you know, something Kirby started doing in the 70s. So I guess Giffen, maybe because it wasn't very common to see double page splashes like this back in the day. So I feel like maybe because this is the 50th anniversary issue, Giffen was given a little bit more leeway. And I also feel like this one is probably inked by either Giffen or Royer, because it's a pretty solid kind of Kirby look to it. Again, everything we've seen in this issue, but just made greater and more detailed. Love the kind of cast shadows on Moon Knight. Moon Knight always has, obviously his costume is basically supposed to be white, and Giffen just chooses to throw a lot of shadows on there, and I think it works really well. And this splash kind of being important in the sense that, again, why did I start these Defenders books and these Defenders reviews? I saw this splash page, I forget if it was online or in some article or something about Keith Giffen, and this is the first time I visually saw, like, I'd heard about Keith Giffen kind of doing a Kirby riff, but I'd actually never seen those Defenders comics, and when I saw this, I thought, man, that is a great double page splash. I really think it looks awesome, and yeah, definitely he's riffing on Kirby, but doing a really good job of it, and that kind of pushed me to seek out these Defenders comics. So, you know, if you're not enjoying these reviews, blame this double page spread here. Got the Kirby crackle, got the debris, looks great. Kind of weird that you've got kind of a, I don't know what happened in the printing process here. The borders seem fairly even on this side and this side, but then we've got an extra border down the middle, which should line up with the staples, and it doesn't. So kind of weird that you would even throw in, you know, this little bit of negative space and split it up so it's almost basically like two splash pages on one page. Why not just go all out and, you know, do a double page splash? So something weird happened with production here, but it's so tiny, it really doesn't ruin my appreciation rather of this image. I think it looks great. Make a great poster. Talked about it before. Lots of ads in these 70s comics really kind of ruins the reading experience a little bit. And these would be some of the pages where I think we've got a different inker on here. We lose a little bit of the Kirby vibe because the aesthetic changes a bit. Not so many squiggly lines. They're still there, but I just feel like the whole inking approach is a little bit different on these pages. And not horrible in any way, but not as enjoyable as when I look at the Kirby stuff. This character is interesting. I'm assuming that's Gemini because there's two of them. And they merge sometimes, so you know you've got kind of the sad face and the happy face, and then they kind of merge, and they're basically half and half here, kind of like my you know, intro image on all my big baby or what do you call that? What's the word I'm looking for? Anyways, when you look up videos and you see the little picture of my videos, there's the face of Big Baby, where one side's kind of you know, showing a negative emotion, the other side showing a positive emotion. That's the best way. I'm not describing this properly, but I kind of get that vibe here. Same kind of idea, and I like how when they combine that, you get both sides. I think that's a kind of a cool concept and a cool looking character, honestly. Simple kind of design, but I don't know, it just kind of works for me. It's like a Kirby concept made a little bit more different or pushed forward a little bit. Man, more ads, crazy. Karate was big right in the 70s. Martial arts were starting to become popular in North America, so you'll get a lot of ads for that. Some interesting stuff going out in the layout here. On this page, we've got the typical Kirby kind of six panel layout rather. You know, very typical kind of house style stuff. But then with the 9-panel grid here, he does something a little bit different and fun, where this panel here kind of gets opened up into two, even though we're still kind of going with that motif from pages before where you're seeing two different levels. So it's almost like it's still two different panels, and yet we're breaking through. Just kind of a clever design idea that I really like. No arrows to indicate where you should go after. So I mean, if you're reading these, I guess you would go like this, like this, like this, like this, and like this. I'm not 100% sure how it's supposed to be read. Maybe like this, like this, like this. But anyways, I just the attempt at doing something a little bit different and interesting, I think is really fun here. Here's a funny one where, like, you know, sometimes when you see some Jack Kirby stuff inked by someone not quite as skilled as Mike Royer, or not quite as paying attention to detail as Mike Royer, and you get something like this where, you know, it's a cool drawing, but I feel like the ink job is a bit shit. That's how I feel about this Moon Knight shot here. And Jack Kirby would do that thing too where he throws in the pupil once in a while, so that's kind of a Kirbyism right there as well. More ads. These are kind of classic, right? The Twinkie ads for the Marvel characters selling Twinkies. So Madam Web right? This is not the Madam Web I'm used to seeing. Was she actually in the comics in the 70s? I kind of only know the Madam Web from the animated series from the early 90s, so she looks quite different. She's a bit older, right? Older lady. So yeah, if you know anything about this character appearing in the comic, let me know in the comments. And we finished the whole book with kind of a sullen sequence with Scorpio. Very sad about the death of Virgo more specifically, but pretty much his whole Zodiac team, or at least members of the Zodiac team, have been wiped out, even though they're robots. And he says, I have nothing left to believe in or to live for, not even myself. So it gets really dark real quick here. I didn't really expect to see this in a Marvel comic. It happens off panel, but basically Scorpio asks this Nick Fury body decoy for the gun. And it says here, a man must meet his own final defeat with class, with panache. Haven't I always said that? I guess at least as far as I'm concerned, this is one sure way to solve the world's problems on my own. Goodbye, Nick. Kabang, kabang. And you get like a reverberation, right? Like an echo. Sounds like a gunshot. And then when they get there, from the look of that mess, the score has already been settled with Scorpio permanently. The LMD must have blown a fuse and just killed him. That's what they assume, right? But they don't know that he actually shot himself. And the hand kind of hanging on down is kind of a symbolic way of not showing you the carnage, and the fact that implying that the character is dead. I was just surprised to see something, you know, in a kid's comic, even in the late 70s, kind of alluding to suicide. Not exactly directly, but that is, I mean, if you're reading it and you understand the story, that is what happened here. So I was kind of surprised to see that in a Marvel comic of that period. I started to think too that maybe things like suicide, you know, while maybe not being discussed that much back in the day, it didn't seem quite as taboo to have in a book that maybe it would today. It's not like that subject hasn't been dealt with in comics before, but I feel like, again, in a comic mostly geared towards kids, it's kind of an odd thing. Image did it as well, right? There's the classic Chapel shooting himself in the head, much more graphic than what we got here. So, you know, there was always this aspect to comics when I was a kid that, you know, every once in a while, it's adults writing comics for kids, but every once in a while they would throw in some fairly adult concepts that maybe weren't meant for kids of such a young age. You know, kind of like the death in the family. When I was a kid, I was like, man, comics have gotten really dark. And I was very surprised to see that in a comic at that age. I was like 7 or 8 when that came out. And, you know, at that point, I was only used to Batman, probably seeing reruns of the old 60s show. So, yeah, the concept of suicide in kind of a mainstream superhero comic, just not that I have anything against it and against broaching the subject, just seems a bit off for this kind of entertainment. And again, just surprised by seeing it here in 1977. And that's going to do it for today, guys, for my review of The Defenders by Keith Giffen, the 50th issue. If you're still watching and you are subscribed, thank you so much. I really do appreciate the support. If you're watching but you're not subscribed, please do so below. It only takes a quick second for you. It's really easy and simple, and it helps the channel grow, helps get us out there to other people who are into comic books just like we are. So thanks again for watching, everybody, and have yourselves an awesome day. King Comics presents Big Baby, Volume 1, Issues 1 to 13, 204 pages of story and art. King Comics also presents Star Crasher one-shot, 32 pages, cosmic sci-fi surrealist adventure. You can find these fine comics at KingComics.CA, at MaximusRex13 on Instagram, or on Facebook, MaxRex or Big Baby.
Like! Subscribe!